Well, we're just getting some lines on the Russian attitude to that crucial summit in Alaska. There's been some briefings from the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov being quoted by the Reuters news agency ahead of that summit. And let's just tell you what the Russians are saying. First of all, that the talks between the Russian and US presidents may last for 6 or 7 hours at least. Their aides will take part in the meetings, which will be essentially one-on-one talks, but with their aides there as well. And the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov also saying that a subsequent second summit, three-way meeting that would also include Ukraine's President Zelensky, it would only be possible if these talks in Alaska bear fruit. We're just looking at pictures there of Mr. Putin, who's on his way to Alaska, and the Russian delegation pretty bullish ahead of the talks. The Russian mediator, negotiator, envoy Kirill Dmitriev has said the talks are aimed at restoring Russia-US relations, not just the economy, not just Ukraine. So they're seeing it as a wider set of talks about Russia-US relations. And also saying, the envoy, Mr. Dmitriev for Russia, that the mood of the Russian camp heading to those talks is combative. That was the quote that is being used by the Russian news agency RIA, quoting him, saying they're combative ahead of those talks. Well, Donald Trump has said he will let Ukraine decide whether to engage in territorial exchanges with Russia. Mr. Trump was talking to reporters on Air Force One as he travels to Alaska for that summit in Anchorage. And prior to his departure on Air Force One, Mr. Trump posted a message on social media with just two words: high stakes. Well, Mr. Trump has said he will let Ukraine decide whether to engage in direct negotiations on territory. And let's just have a listen to what he had to say. But before we do, let's also talk to Steve Yates, who's former Deputy National Security Advisor to Dick Cheney. Thank you very much for being with us. How do you see this summit going? Do you think it will be successful? Do you think it will bear fruit?
Well, I think it all comes down to a definition of success. I think President Trump has been very transparent about his objective of stopping the killing first, then defining some verifiable way to keep the peace. And then you have the long-term issues of disposition of land and whether there's a path to peace and prosperity generally that's sustainable. So this is a litmus test, first in-person conversation to see whether there's a way forward or whether we go back to where we've been, which is increasing pressure with Europe getting stronger, America supporting transfer of arms to Europe that can help Ukraine.
We were just saying there, one of the Russian negotiators saying the Russian attitude to these talks is combative. Do you actually think that Mr. Putin wants a deal? Does he want to see any kind of breakthrough?
I have my doubts about Mr. Putin in any number of respects, but ultimately it comes down to a correlation of power and pressure. And are they feeling like they need to make a change? There's high likelihood of dragging things out. And so President Trump is going to have to decide in terms of how to secure a ceasefire, which has been elusive for 3.5 years, what is necessary to just get that first step. I think talk of land and other things are more distant prospects in this more natural process. So I think, to me, the meeting does help. The Russians came to America. Some might see that as a good move. And then do we have an actual path to verify things in the month ahead where there'll be more real change than there's been subsequent to any previous conversation?
As I was saying, the Kremlin have just said they expect these talks to last a minimum of 6 or 7 hours. But we were hearing yesterday from Donald Trump, he said he could probably know in 2 or 3 minutes whether Mr. Putin is serious about peace, whether the talks are worth pursuing.
Well, I personally wouldn't have a stopwatch trying to track the 2 minutes, but I do think that it's generally the case. He probably will have an initial impression of whether this is a fruitful and productive conversation. There might be some fits and starts. If you look back at the way the president engaged the leader of North Korea, there was a stop and go pattern in that, which could include pausing and walking away. So I still think there's some variables to play out, but the odds are the Russians can take a long time to talk about these things. You have interpretation that cuts the time somewhat in half. There probably would be breaks. So it's not unreasonable to think that magnitude of this consequence would take some time. And they might talk about issues that are not just Ukraine, although that is front and center and highest priority.
Hasn't Donald Trump just handed Mr. Putin a kind of PR propaganda victory straight away just by inviting him onto American territory to this high-profile summit? I mean, he is an indicted war criminal, isn't he?
Well, I just see it differently. If we want to try to stop a war, realist foreign policy usually is you have to meet with those that are engaged in it, especially those that are primarily responsible for it. If you're going to have some kind of a peace that holds, you're going to have some kind of arrangement to try to keep that peace and deter further aggression. Having the Russian leader come to America, some might see that as them coming to us. It would have looked worse to have our president go to them, I would suspect. And so I would rather focus less on the ceremonial aspects of it, but what real action comes of it. If there's little action, that's a problem, but we have options.
But I mean, this is a meeting without Zelensky of Ukraine, without any of the key European leaders who've got such a stake in this as well. Again, in that sense, Donald Trump has just handed a victory to Mr. Putin on a plate. This is what Mr. Putin wants, just a one-on-one meeting with Trump with nobody else involved.
I just see it very, very differently because this is ultimately the only leader in the world who has a shot at possibly changing Vladimir Putin's trajectory, which for 3.5 years has been one way. Every form of coalition, engagement, sanctions, otherwise have led us to where we are. And this is not a final disposition meeting. This is the beginning of a test of is a ceasefire even on the immediate horizon, or is much more substantial and comprehensive sanction activity necessary, like the energy sanctions that were applied to India, but maybe have to be broadly applied to China too. And so there's still a lot more steps that I think need to be played out. And so I'm a little less worried about who's in the immediate meeting. If there's going to be success, then yes, Ukraine absolutely has to be a part of that process and agreement and implementation, as do our key European allies.
Really good to have you on the programme. Thanks so much for your insights and analysis and thoughts. Steve Yates there, former Deputy National Security Advisor to Dick Cheney. Thanks for being with us on BBC News.